Hello everyone, today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite GameCube games, Tales of Symphonia. The plot of Tales of Symphonia begins with a world being slowly depleted of mana and an increase in the activity of various monsters and the aggressive race known as the Desians. And every generation there is a chosen one, in this case Colette, who is sent on a journey to become a true angel and journey to the Tower of Salvation and awaken the goddess Martel. And she'll do this by traveling to different temples all throughout the world and breaking seals and awakening their corresponding summons. So it's pretty much the plot of Final Fantasy X, with her friends acting as the guardians going around and protecting her through her journey. So it starts off as kind of a general save the world storyline, but it gets a little more complicated and a little more interesting when they realize that there's actually a tug of war between two worlds vying for this singular source of mana, and learning the nature of this mirror world and sort of going against the grain and turning the story into not a plot to save one world at the expense of another, but trying to go against tradition and against what's expected and find a way to do the impossible and save both worlds. So the overall plot isn't incredibly original, but it does have quite a few little original twists in it that keep it from seeming all too cliched and keeping you from being disinterested. But like most Tales games, the main overall plot is actually not the draw. There's something very unique in the writing to Tales games as compared to something like Final Fantasy, where the overall plot isn't necessarily the main focus of the writing. The plot is almost a very well-written excuse for these characters to interact. It's still, again, it's a decent plot, but nothing that's going to stand out against, greater things like Xenogears or Final Fantasy IX or Final Fantasy VI, or even something like Persona 4. But it can be compared to something like Persona, where the focus is on the character interactions. It's actually the best thing about Tales games, not necessarily the overall plot, but the characters themselves. The characters are always really well written, and there's always a lot of character growth, and the main focus is in the interactions. And a lot of those interactions come through in something that's fairly unique to the Tales series, all these little segments where you will have skits that show up and show character interactions as you're journeying. So you'll be walking along the main world, and you'll have like a little skit pop up, and the characters will actually talk. It's sort of almost like you could say like a campfire scene, where in a lot of games you're missing that interaction. The characters only interact during very important scenes, whereas in a Tales game you're actually getting sort of the day-to-day interactions between the characters. They're on this long journey, sometimes they're going for in-game time for days, journeying across this land, and there would be interaction, there would be character growth and getting to know each other, and that's missing from a lot of RPGs, particularly from this time period. So it's a very unique and very sort of skillful way of getting the interaction and the quality of the characters and their individual lives being the primary focus rather than the actual overall plot that all holds it together. And like I said, the plot though is good enough that it does hold it together, although it has a couple major flaws. One being the focus of the game is more on the hero Lloyd Irving and Colette, of course, the chosen one. But if you really pay attention to the story, especially if you played it more than once, the actual hero, the actual savior of everything, is Sheena. And if you've really played it and you really pay attention, you'll know what I'm talking about. Their entire plan, nothing would work without the character of Sheena. She is the actual hero, and my favorite character because of that, of the entire story. Like really, if you've played it before and it's been a long time, go back and check it out, and if you're playing it for the first time, pay attention to that character in particular, and you'll see what I mean. There's a major flaw in the writing where sort of, not necessarily background character, but someone who's not one of the two main focuses is more important than your main character. And that's kind of an odd choice that I feel like can be considered a little bit more of a flaw in the writing. The other major flaw is the artwork, while beautifully colorful and some of the best early cel-shaded animation that I've ever seen, especially 2003-ish, there wasn't a whole lot doing that beautiful, beautiful cel shading yet, and at the time nothing else really had done it better. But while the towns and the characters themselves are incredibly detailed and look fantastic, the overworld seems a little bland and a little lacking in pizzazz. Like, it's something where it just seems, you're walking along, it seems it could almost be any other nice cel-shaded game's overworld. It's nothing that really stands out, but as soon as you get into that town that you're heading to in the overworld, it becomes this beautiful work of art. And there's a little bit of a disconnect there, where if the whole game had the same look as when you're in battle or when you're in an actual location, it would artistically be one of the greatest games of its age. But a couple little visual flaws keep it from quite being at that very, very top spot. Again, a very beautiful game, but has a few instances of less than perfection, I'll say. The same thing goes with the soundtrack. It has a beautiful, beautiful soundtrack throughout the entire thing. Everything fits it very nicely. It fits the tone. There's a lot of comedy elements. It's a very, very good balance where you have some very deep and very either heartwarming or sometimes terrifying or sometimes very almost depressing moments, but they're countered by an even greater amount of pure comedy moments that goes a lot into that character interaction that I was talking about. And a lot of the music fits those. The main problem with the sound, though, is there are a couple of instances, most notably the opening sequence, that was changed from the original Japanese release. And if you go online and look up the original Japanese opening for the GameCube version, it is so much better than what we got. It does happen in a lot of Tales games. They tend to take out the original opening and add an instrumental piece with no voices that is still good, but just doesn't have the same quality. And so a few little instances like that. And the other problem is with the voice acting. The voice acting for the game is near perfect, as in the actual translation is done very, very well. The people that were chosen to be voice actors fit the characters. Everything's presented very, very nicely. But occasionally, there can be issues where almost that talking through a tin can sound that some games have. Another good example is occasionally in Final Fantasy XII. It almost will sound occasionally like the character is talking in a sound studio. It sort of has a little bit, not quite a reverb, but it really just sounds recorded rather than quite as natural as it could sound. And that's a bit of a shame because, like I said, the performances are great. The dialogue is well written, well translated, everything is fantastic, and it's definitely not a game-ruining thing. It's actually not even a huge flaw. It's just something that's definitely more noticeable if you play games that don't really have that sound issue. But again, a lot of games that even have that sound issue aren't as well written dialogue-wise as this one is. So it's the same thing with the world map issue. It's a flaw, but definitely not a huge flaw, and it's not in any way a game breaker.
I won't let you Desians get away with... Desians?
What's so funny?
Well then, die.
So Lord Remiel really is my father.
Does it matter? Regardless of who your real father is, you're still you. Nothing's changed. You just have two fathers. Just think of yourself as being lucky for having more than most people do.
I suppose you're right.
World regeneration, huh? It's kind of exciting.
Yeah, releasing the seals, becoming an angel, then finally...
Finally?
Nothing. Anyway, if we go to the Seal of Fire, I'll get to see my father again.
Yeah, me too.
The main gameplay for Tales of Symphonia will be familiar to anyone who's played a JRPG, especially from that era. The difference being that in the Tales games, it has either random encounters, or in this one, not necessarily random encounters. You'll see sort of generic representations of enemies on screen as you run into them. Then it's sort of a randomly generated group of villains that you'll be fighting. And when you go into that, though, it turns into an action RPG. So it's not a real-time action RPG as in you're fighting on the world map, but as you go into the randomized combat, it turns into an action RPG. And this is the first one. Tales of Symphonia really set the groundwork for all the modern Tales games. This is the transition one from all the older 2D Tales games into later 3D Tales games, where it gives you a little bit more room to run around in the main combat. It's still not a quite 3D free roam combat yet, but you can fight on different planes rather than in the 2D ones. It was all along mostly like one plane and fighting just sort of along almost like along a straight line. It's kind of the difference between a lot of old 2D sort of fighting games versus going into the early stages of 3D fighting games. There's a little bit of room to move around, but it's not quite up to something like Soul Calibur. You can kind of go all around the ring. Think of it something like a little bit of a downgraded in the movement of Battle Arena Touch Shinden. So it has a great action-based combat system that's a little bit of a mix between a fighting game and an RPG. And I say that when you first look at it, it looks just sort of like a fighting game where you can control whatever your chosen character to control directly in that battle is, and you can switch, but you'll mainly stick with one character in a battle, and it's presented like a fighting game where you're just sort of using all these different moves the same way you would in a one-on-one fighting game while the AI controls your other teammates. But it's more like an RPG in that you can also directly give orders or use items or use all kinds of things through a menu to all the characters, even the ones you're not directly controlling. And you can change like the AI, you can change how they target, how they fight, how they use or conserve energy, or just all these different components that are part of a normal RPG. So it's a big fusion between almost a fighting game style with a traditional turn-based RPG style. And it's very unique and it's a lot of fun. And that's kind of the main thing with Tales games is, as I said, the plot is not always the deepest. It's always good, but it's never, well, rarely I'll say, spectacular. The main focus is in the characters and in this action gameplay and in the fun. That's the main thing about something like Tales of Symphonia. It's very pretty, it's very happy, it's very just genuinely fun. It's a joy to play. It's something that's not going to make you necessarily think about the meaning of life and all these just deep things, and it's not, but it's just a joy to play, and it's not simplified enough that you're going to get bored with it. It's still mentally stimulating in the way that it presents an idea a little bit more simply, but the idea itself can still be interesting. So Tales of Symphonia is a very, very fun game. One thing I'll say about it, though, is although it is one of my favorite GameCube games and one of my favorite Tales games, and not my favorite, it is a little bit overhyped. It is a fantastic game. If you've never played it and you own a GameCube, you definitely need to try it out. I mean, like I said, one of the best games on the system. But why it stands out so much for people, particularly in North America, that's where a lot of the praise comes from, is because it's on the GameCube. And if you don't know, at the time, the PlayStation 2, thanks in part to the success of the original PlayStation, really captured the RPG genre. And without the success of something like the Saturn in North America, the PS1 in North America was like the RPG machine. And that carried over into the PlayStation 2, where the PlayStation 2 was just flooded with RPGs. And even the Xbox and the Dreamcast had far more RPGs than the GameCube. Nintendo, back in the day, with the Super Nintendo, was really known for their RPGs, but fell flat on the face of the N64, and the GameCube was struggling to recover that genre back. It was a very RPG-starved system. So putting an incredible, just high-quality RPG like Tales of Symphonia on the GameCube instead of the PlayStation 2 was a fantastic marketing idea from Namco. It was such a good idea. It was a way to break in. By releasing it just on the PlayStation 2, it would have been slightly overshadowed because it had a lot of competition. Now, Tales of Symphonia was eventually ported to the PlayStation 2 in Japan, only in Japan, but in North America we only got the GameCube version. And that's where a lot of the overhype, I don't know, almost like gushing over this game. It's a beautiful game, it's a lot of fun, it has great characters and a decent story, nice soundtrack. It is a very, very good game with very few flaws, that none of which are huge game-breaking deals, but it's not something that stands out quite as much as people remember. And a lot of that comes from, if you were younger and you only owned one system, and say your system was the GameCube, this was just a godsend. This thing right here was a huge just drop when it came down because they didn't have competition. There were so few RPGs on the system. So that's a lot of why it stands out more than it should. It's a fantastic game, but it sort of revels in this glorious circumstance rather than being just what it is. If this thing had released on the PlayStation 2 rather than the GameCube, it wouldn't have quite the same praise. It would still be considered a fantastic game, but for a lot of people, It is considered to be one of the greatest games of all time. A lot of people, it's their favorite Tales game. And for the majority of those people, the majority of them are people that only owned a GameCube back when this came out, or it was their very first Tales game. Because the Tales series before Tales of Symphonia was not only fairly unknown in North America, we got a very few of the releases. After Tales of Symphonia, we slowly started to get more and more releases, still missing a lot, but it was a little more consistent, and it was a little bit more of a popular, well-known series here in North America. So Tales of Symphonia, a great game that is full of fantastic gameplay, fun characters, a good story, and some amazing puzzles. I forgot to mention how puzzle-heavy a lot of the gameplay is. A lot of places, lots of like block-pushing puzzles, and they range from being very simplistic to sometimes almost frustratingly like mind-bending. In a good way, though, in a very entertaining way. It's a great way of balancing out the gameplay. It's a very well-balanced game, just an absolutely beautiful game, and a wonderful experience that you have to get for your GameCube. One of the best games on the system. But I'll say again, it's not going to be, if you're going in expecting one of the greatest games ever made, you might be a little disappointed. It's a very, very good RPG, and one of my favorite games of all time, but certainly nothing that would like crack the top 10. A good game, but a little bit overhyped considering how it came out.